A new Nintendo Direct means new first-party announcements, and this gives us a useful route to anticipating where Nintendo might be going next. In this video, I have picked out 10 development groups who have been quiet for a good while and therefore may be particularly likely to surface in the coming year. We will review the teams, consider which games they might be working on, and at the end, I will give my forecast with my own judgment of the relative likelihoods of these particular studios having games show up soon. Without further ado, therefore, let's get into it with Team 1, Intelligent Systems, specifically the Intelligent System team that work on Fire Emblem. Three Houses wrapped its DLC in 2020, Fire Emblem Engage dropped in 2023, and since then the Fire Emblem team have been rather quiet. Now, it used to be that Fire Emblem titles, including remakes, released at a fairly steady cadence of one every 2 to 3 years. The arrival of HD gaming with Switch and now 4K gaming with Switch 2 probably pushes these windows out a little bit more, but all the same, it strikes me as improbable that we'll be waiting too much longer for more Fire Emblem, and it's the sort of game that has historically targeted the spring window. Fire Emblem Three Houses was definitely delayed out of spring 2019, which was the date originally announced for it in E3 2018, while there's strong evidence that Fire Emblem Engage also had a delay. However, Path of Radiance, Awakening, Fates, and Shadows of Valentia all dropped between April and June. Plus, there was Fire Emblem Warriors Three Hopes in June 2022. Nintendo tends to have fairly standard rhythms. Why this is specifically, it's hard to be sure, though it probably reflects that the Fire Emblem games are important titles but not vast sellers for the company and so are well positioned outside the main holiday window. Also, if I were to speculate, it might be that Intelligent Systems, being a smaller developer which probably doesn't have the deep pockets of Nintendo and so which needs to keep games releasing at a stricter cadence, have contractual finishing dates linked to the ends of financial years, which would also explain why Paper Mario is also in this window of April to June very often. Obviously, Intelligent Systems do sometimes have games released later in the year, such as WarioWare, but these are smaller endeavours. Whether a remake like the long-rumoured Fire Emblem 4 or a completely new Fire Emblem title, some kind of announcement, feels like a reasonable shout. However, it is possible that we get an Intelligent System title, but not from the Fire Emblem group. Last year, I deep-dived the credits for Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, and I noted that the staff on that game were significantly different from those on Paper Mario The Origami King 4 years previously. Now, Intelligent Systems sometimes has staff going over to WarioWare, and indeed, there were not the usual one, but two WarioWare titles in the last few years, in 2021 and 2023. A WarioWare is a traditional follow-up to a Paper Mario, and under normal circumstances one might expect a 2025 WarioWare. Indeed, I think there's still a reasonable chance we will see one, given how Nintendo has focused on mass-player games like Super Mario Party Jamboree and Everybody One to Switch, games which bring lots of people together onto the Switch family of systems and which they can use to promote game chat and the online service. A WarioWare with large numbers of people involving game chat could be pretty useful as a promotional tool for them, and they have used Wario for this purpose if you think back to games like Game & Wario. Of course, another option is that there's a group working on something completely different. This could be pretty much anything. Intelligent Systems has created its own game franchises before, after all, so we could perhaps see another Pushmo, and if Nintendo wanted to build on any of its franchises like Zelda and Donkey Kong, having a light RPG spin-off from the Paper Mario team might be a boon. And then of course there's Fossil Fighters, although that's something I'll get into in another video. Team 2, MercurySteam. The Spanish studio behind Metroid Samus Returns and Metroid Dread have released their own original project, Blades of Fire, in 2025, but MercurySteam have been expanding hugely in recent years, growing nearly 50% since Metroid Dread wrapped, and they have always paired Nintendo contract releases with their own original works, so I still think that something from Nintendo is likely to be on the cards. With the success of Dread, it just seems implausible that they have made their last Metroid. However, it's easy enough to understand why MercurySteam might not have a title for this particular window. Quite simply, it will be overkill to announce Metroid 6 before Metroid Prime 4 has even dropped. Even so, it would be kind of surprising if the next Nintendo collaboration weren't nearly done by now, and if they knew that Metroid Prime 4 was going to risk releasing in the same window, is it possible that MercurySteam might have been asked to do something else besides another Metroid game? After all, they handled Castlevania for Konami before Metroid Dread, and it feels like there are other franchises that their unique take could be interesting to see. Samus Returns director and Metroid Dread assistant director Takahiko Kazukawa has a long track record with Wario Land, going back to directing the Game Boy Classic, something I've deep dived in a recent video. Meanwhile, the original creator of Kid Icarus is nearing retirement, and given that Metroid Dread producer Sakamoto supervised the original title, I wonder if there's a chance that MercurySteam could be tasked with booting up a new Kid Icarus, a franchise that has huge potential for Nintendo, but which is currently in a deep dormancy. Again, I have a deeper video on this, and I'll put some links in the description below. I think if MercurySteam are working on something non-Metroid, then there's a good chance we see it soon. Although if they are Metroid bound, I can't see why Nintendo would scoop Metroid Prime 4 by announcing it before mid next year at the earliest. Team 3, EPD Group 9. EPD9 are famous, of course, for Mario Kart, and so it might sound ridiculous to say that they have been quiet recently. Isn't Mario Kart World a gigantic open-world title? Didn't they also have a little bit of a hand in Dragon Drive, the not-so-gigantic closed-court game, which was worked on by Kosuke Ibuki? Yeah, that's all true, but this is after a long break for the group. They worked on Mario Kart Tour and the booster course pass for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which, let's face it, was mostly just cannibalized Tour content anyway, but before that, their last titles were in 2017, when they did a double hit of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and ARMS. In 2011, for the 3DS launch, they also double-dipped. Basically, I think it's very likely that they have another game besides Mario Kart World on the go, and if so, it's probably under the command of longtime co-producer Yasuyuki Oyagi, who directed Mario Kart Wii and Nintendogs Plus Cats in 2011, but on Mario Kart World was credited as Special Thanks. This usually means that they were in the same group, but they weren't specifically working on the individual game. Even if Oyagi had left the company, it's unlikely he would be given a generic thanks credit, since he was co-producer on the Booster Course Pass and so was definitely around for a very good chunk of World's development. Therefore, we can anticipate him coming back, and perhaps sooner rather than later. Nintendogs is an obvious tip for this. ARMS 2 is less likely, since the group behind that were far more intimately involved in Mario Kart World. I do think we'll see another ARMS, but I think it'll be quite a few years away. Still, the overall producer of this group, Kosuke Ibuki, was behind both ARMS and Dragon Drive, and has talked before about how he has people keen to try new and exciting things in his team. My hunch, therefore, is that if there is an EPD9 game, it's as likely as not to be something brand new. That doesn't necessarily mean a completely new group of characters. After all, there was a time when Splatoon could have been a Mario title, and if they think the best way to sell an IP that's new in the build-up to the Mario movie is by sticking Mario's face on it, they will definitely go that route. Or, of course, they could always add the faces of some of Mario's friends who also potentially need building up. But it will, in essence, be an original type of game that I could see them developing. Team 4, Next Level Games. The Canadian Aces have always released like clockwork for Nintendo every 3 years. 2013, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. 2016, Metroid Prime Federation Force. 2019, Luigi's Mansion 3. 2022, Mario Strikers Battle League. The obvious deduction is that Luigi's Mansion 4 is on the way for this very year, and to be honest, this theory does make a lot of sense, especially since we don't yet have an announcement of what the game is going to be for the last week of October, even though it seems like a very probable window to have one. Luigi's Mansion 2 HD was released last year, just like how Luigi's Mansion on 3DS was released the year before Luigi's Mansion 3 dropped. It's a huge title that would spotlight one of the peripheral Mario characters, just like Donkey Kong Bonanza, but it wouldn't compete with Bonanza. It would make people feel better about the wait for the next 3D Mario, and the game is definitely going to be an absolutely huge seller, given that Luigi's Mansion 3 sold more even than Splatoon 2 at last count. However, I still remain a little doubtful. For one thing, there's quite a credit overlap between the people involved in Luigi's Mansion 3 and the people involved in Mario Strikers Battle League. And while Battle League was released after just 2.5 years and frankly felt pretty bare bones, and while also Next Level Games have been expanding since Nintendo bought them out with an explicit aim to increase their output, I just think Nintendo may want Luigi's Mansion 4 to be a truly vast title that would suit more like a 5 or 6 year dev cycle and still be a game that they could promote ahead of a potential Luigi's Mansion movie sometime this generation. Now, it's true, Next Level Games did amazing work on Switch with just the 3 years, but Nintendo already has Luigi's Mansion 3 playable on the Switch. For this reason, while Luigi's Mansion 4 feels plausible, I think we could potentially see a different Next Level Games title. I think a theory for what we'd see might go like this. When Nintendo bought them out, they were planning to expand the team, and they have been doing this. One team, therefore, might have remained developing core ideas for the long-term plan for the company, Luigi's Mansion 4. However, the second group worked on Mario Strikers Battle League with a little support from some of the senior figures. Now, that second group, probably more interested in multiplayer-type gaming, could have been expanded to be its own separate entity, working on its own independent title. What that title could be would remain to be seen. Another Mario Sports is certainly possible. Hoops was handled by Square long ago, baseball has been handled by Bandai, and tennis and golf have always belonged to Camelot Software Planning. Long ago, Next Level Games proposed a volleyball wrestling combo game called Super Mario Spikers, and while that title was cancelled a long time ago, it feels plausible to me that Nintendo could put Mario into a new sports environment, such as hockey or even, since the team is Canadian, ice hockey. Actually, though, this is another case where the possibilities are very large indeed. I think it's more likely that this would be a branded game, but there are possibilities beyond Mario. Surely a Splatoon sports game also has great potential. Next Level Games also has a real skill set with character animation, and if Nintendo wanted to really build up Donkey Kong, it strikes me that they would be well suited to take the Great Ape on. I'll talk 2D Donkey Kong in another video, but I don't know that Next Level Games are necessarily that clear a fit for that specific title, and in any event, I can't see another 2D Donkey Kong so soon after both Donkey Kong Country Returns HD and Donkey Kong Bonanza released during 2025. However, Diddy Kong Racing and the cool-looking but cancelled Donkey Kong Racing show that Donkey Kong can make sense as the lead of a racing title. The people upset that 2 franchise racers are releasing in the space of a year would be nonplussed, but I'm sure a Donkey Kong racer could feel quite distinct from either of those games, and there is very evidently demand for Nintendo-style racing action, as the huge success of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe evidenced. So I wouldn't rule it out. After all, Nintendo have a load of platform games of various descriptions, so adding multiple racing games would fit this broad strategy. Team 5. Camelot Software Planning. I've mentioned this team so often, but it's unusual for them to have been so quiet for so long. Not since Mario Golf Super Rush in 2021 have they released a title, even though they had released titles previously in 2018 and 2016 before that. It's also a tricky one because for a quarter century they have only worked on Mario Golf and Mario Tennis titles, usually alternating with one exception, the RPG they created, Golden Sun. Now, I don't see the massive burning need for a new golf or tennis title on Switch 2, while Aces and Super Rush are available and backwards compatible, so I've sometimes felt like a sports compilation might be a better next step for Mario Sports for Nintendo at this time. I could definitely see Camelot collaborating on that. There's also, though, the significant chance that before the Takahashi brothers retire, they are in their 60s now after all, they will go back to their roots. In the 90s, the Takahashis were responsible for the absolutely phenomenal genius of the Shining games, such as Shining Force, and there was a brief, ill-fated attempt to revive Shining Force in the early 2020s as a mobile game. Sega is in the mood to revive franchises recently with Shinobi, Streets of Rage, Wonder Boy, and 2D Sonic all returning, so whether it's with a long-awaited return to Shining Force or a return to Golden Sun, it feels plausible to me that Camelot could be returning to the RPG space, and they would argue that they never left it, with both Tennis Aces and Golf Super Rush having what they pointed to as significant RPG modes, albeit with a sports theming. One way or another, we are well past the time that we would expect to see Camelot rocking up with a new project, and so whether it's Golden Sun, Shining Force, or just another Mario sports title, we can reasonably expect to see the fruits of their labour sometime in the next year or so. Team 6. Bandai Namco. Okay, this is a tricky one. Bandai actually have two Nintendo-facing groups. One works with Sakurai and is currently building Kirby Air Riders, as confirmed in the recent Kirby Air Riders Direct. However, there's another team which worked on Pokken Tournament and New Pokemon Snap, and they have been quiet for a long time. There's Pokemon Champions coming up, but reportedly this is from the new group the Pokemon Company have formed with Ilka. Now, there were rumours last year that a Bandai Namco project had been shelved, and there's obviously the possibility that it was a Pokemon project from this team, given that they have been rather quiet. I also don't necessarily think a Nintendo General Direct would be the best place to announce such a title, given that Pokemon has an anniversary coming up, and so the February 2026 Pokemon Presents is likely to be quite huge. If there was a game cancelled, then it might explain the relatively long Pokemon gap we have experienced between 2023's Detective Pikachu Returns and 2025's Pokemon Legends Arceus. 2024's holiday season would have been the perfect opportunity for a stop-gap Pokemon spin-off title, and yet it was missed. All things considered, though, it strikes me that it would be an odd move to cancel a contract from a big partner like Nintendo on a game with fairly surefire sales based on brand recognition. However, even if this Bandai group had their game cancelled, we could still see Bandai in another form, behind a Mario baseball game. The recent Seattle Mariners Mario tie-in is probably a discreet promotion, but if Bandai Namco were working not on the whole of a new Mario Sports Mix game, but perhaps on just one or two sections, such as bringing over baseball and horse racing from the 3DS, it might be a side project they could manage alongside their work with Sakurai, especially as Camelot and others would likely do a lot of the heavy lifting on such a sports project. I tended to think that a Mario Sports for 2026 is a good shout for quite a while, but whether now is the right time to announce it, I'm not sure. They may have a lot of other Mario content for the anniversary window, and Mario Sports, which would usually be a summer title, hardly needs a long hype cycle to do well. An announcement earlier next year would feel more standard. Team 7, EPD Group 4. The Wacky Funsters at EPD4 are more of a light entertainment and experimental group for Nintendo, being headed by Switch 2 mastermind Kawamoto, who also of course debuted Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour with the system. EPD4 tends to average a game a year, more or less, but they're not always the sort of titles that make directs. Labo, Ring Fit, Switch Sports, and so on. Everybody Want to Switch was a collaboration with Nintendo Cube, Nintendo World Championships was a team-up with Indie Zero, and with Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour being a tiny, downloadable title, I still think we are well overdue something from this group. In particular, it's been all quiet for a few years from both the sports and fitness teams, and yes, I've deep-dived these previously, and although there's some overlap, they have quite distinct top teams for Wii Fit to Ring Fit and Wii Sports to Switch Sports. Nevertheless, there has to be a decent chance we could see something from them, especially since we have yet to see from them a true game that serves as a tech demo. Sure, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour was effectively a tech demo, but it's far smaller in scope than the likes of Nintendo Land or even 1-2-Switch, which were true, full-price games. I still think some kind of Mario game folding in some of the tech from Mario Paint, Wii Music, and other previous creative endeavours may have a chance at some point, but whether that time is now is more a question. There's a good chance, of course, that what they have next is another collaboration with a different party. Perhaps if the Mario Maker team are working on some kind of 3D making game featuring Mario, EPD4 could contribute some of their tech from their music or cannibalize elements from Game Builder Garage and Labo into a different type of Mario Maker game. It definitely feels like mouse mode is something this group will want to focus on. While Dragon Drive and Metroid Prime 4 are definitely good showcases for it, I suspect there's still a lot more to come before they're done with exploring this gimmick. While this team may not get core audiences the most excited, personally I do love a wacky Nintendo thing, and sometimes, as with 2019's Ring Fit Adventure, it turns out to be a slam dunk modern classic, and so I am rather intrigued to see where they go next. Having said that, given that Labo came in the second year of the Switch, it may be that they wait until a little bit later on to reveal what they've actually been working on. Team 8, Tantalus. Tantalus is an Australian company who in recent years has had two separate teams developing for Nintendo. Firstly, there's the Zelda Twilight Princess HD and Skyward Sword HD team who, if they keep to their 5-yearly rhythm, are definitely overdue. I've got a separate video deep diving Zelda's future on Switch 2 as a whole, plus another video addressing a potential Ocarina of Time remake specifically, so I won't spend too much time discussing this team, except to say that they remain a decent shout. But I think the second team also has to have a reasonable chance of having a game on the go. They did a decent job porting Luigi's Mansion 2, and it strikes me that Nintendo will want to try to bring their 3DS library over to Switch as soon as they reasonably can, given that it represents a good library of games that many new players won't have experienced. Donkey Kong Country Returns HD included content from the 3DS game, and there are other titles which would make sense to move across in a similar way. Yoshi's Woolly World with the Poochie content from the 2017 3DS version would be an obvious one, mirroring the release of Donkey Kong Country Returns HD in the January slot last year. Zelda: A Link Between Worlds feels like low-hanging fruit as well, and since Tantalus has been a reliable Zelda port studio before, albeit with a different team, this would be a logical one to bring across with Zelda's 40th anniversary drawing near. It would be a great forward-compatible Switch game, and who knows, we could even see a Plus game bolt-on for a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, which could be pretty intriguing. There are also a lot of Kirby titles that could happily see a port, with Kirby Planet Robobot probably being the best loved. I doubt we'd see an announcement for something of this nature too soon, with Forgotten Land and Air Riders already in 2025, but it's not completely impossible either that they have a Kirby game in March, which is the traditional Kirby season. It would definitely be a massive push for Kirby, but then they want to give Kirby a massive push, especially on the original Switch, which hasn't had a new Kirby game this year. Less likely would be titles like Kid Icarus Uprising, where, as I've covered before, it strikes me that creator Masahiro Sakurai would want to take a firmer hand. It's also possible that Tantalus could port over a non-3DS title, perhaps a Wii title from the Excite series or Punch-Out! Either way, with two seemingly active Nintendo-facing studios on their books, I suspect it won't be too long before we see a new Tantalus project on Nintendo hardware. Team 9, 18. This channel's earliest video was dedicated to exploring the potential future of 18 as a Pikmin developer. The group, who previously developed Kuro Kuro Kurin for Nintendo, started with Pikmin 3 Deluxe and offered a huge chunk of staff to support on Pikmin 4, although they didn't lead production itself. These games, of course, were released in 3 yearly intervals, and we will be coming up on 3 years since the last Pikmin next year. I think Nintendo is very keen to push Pikmin as a franchise and to make it one of its major titles, and since they've been pushing Donkey Kong, Kirby and Metroid heavily in recent times, how long can it really be before we see something Pikmin themed? Now, to be clear, I wouldn't expect Pikmin 5 just yet, as this will be led by EPD Group 10, who are pretty busy themselves, having released Super Mario Bros. Wonder in 2023 as well. However, this would be a great time for a Plus game version of Pikmin 4, where 18 could probably handle a significant chunk of the content, or if not, it might be a brilliant moment for a Pikmin spin-off title. If Splatoon Raiders is showing that there can be different takes on Splatoon gameplay between mainline entries, surely it makes sense for Nintendo to try to do the same with Pikmin. Even in the unlikely event that 18 aren't working on Pikmin, I suspect it's unlikely that they would let trusted previous collaborators drift away when they need development muscle more than ever, and so there's always an outside shot they could be on a different title or even something of their own, like another Kurin game. I doubt it, but it will be exciting to see what 18 come out with next. Team 10, Nintendo Software Technology. One of Nintendo's more enigmatic teams, Nintendo Software Technology is the less famous American development group internal to Nintendo, with a deep history including on titles like Wave Race Blue Storm, the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, and Metroid Prime Hunters, although until around 2020 on Switch, they had spent a few quieter years releasing games that mainly involved development support on titles like Snipperclips, as well as working on Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. But they seem to have been significant movers in Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, with some evidence that they were involved not just in the ports but the actual Bowser's Fury mode itself, while they also brought us Mario vs. Donkey Kong in 2024 and F-Zero 99 as well. Because their projects trend smaller and frequently have a collaborative element, it feels believable that we could see a new Nintendo Software Technology title pretty soon, and probably in the Mario vein following their previous collaborative work with EPD8 in Tokyo on Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury and Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. However, I have deep dived this in a separate video on the Mario 40th anniversary. So one thing I like to do on this channel is to try and calibrate my predictions by committing to specific percentage forecasts of 10, 30, 50, 70 and 90% likelihoods. Then every year or so I'll look back at all my 10% forecasts and hope to see that 10% of the time they've come true, while 90% of the 90% forecasts have come true. The percentages themselves don't have any intrinsic meaning, they're just my judgments, and by all means play along in the comment section, making sure you bookmark to ensure bragging rights when and if you get spot on. Incidentally, I do sometimes delist older videos just so YouTube doesn't push video content that is blatantly dated, but all such videos are still available for anybody who wants to check back. I'll leave a link in the description where you can see the complete archive of delisted videos, and then you just click through and you can watch them again. Last time I checked, my accuracy was quite decent in the aggregate, but it's just a bit of fun, so let's see how we go. I'm also trying something a bit different here by grouping them at the end, and I'm going to do this in percentage bands. So without further ado, the 90% forecasts. I think we can expect at least one of these developers listed in this video to have a game release by the end of 2026. I also think we'll see some kind of release that hasn't been announced yet by the end of 2026 for one of the franchises Nintendo are currently nurturing, specifically Pikmin, Fire Emblem, Kirby, Donkey Kong, and Metroid. I really think they'll want to push these franchises as much as possible. So even though some of them have had releases already, I still think we could see a lot more from them. We can also be, I think, 90% sure that there will be a Mario game released before Thanksgiving. In fact, I'm not even sure when the last time was that there was a Mario game missing from the holiday season. I think it might have been sometime in the 90s. 70% forecasts. I think we'll see another Mario sports title by the end of 2027. I think we'll see Intelligent Systems release a title, not quite sure what, by the end of 2026. I think we'll see what Camelot have been working on by the end of 2026 as well. 50% forecasts. I think we'll see what Next Level Games are doing next by the end of 2026. I think we'll see a Pikmin release by the end of 2026, and I think there'll be a new Fire Emblem release, although not necessarily a brand new game, by the end of 2026 as well. 30% forecasts. I think there'll be a new EPD9 title by the end of 2026. Zelda will appear in the next General Direct, and I suspect they'll want to keep Zelda stuff back for the 40th and the run-up to the movie. And also 30% I think there'll be a 3DS port by the end of 2026. 10% forecasts, well, these are either long shots as concepts or else have very specific wording that makes the precise outcome less likely, but they're still interesting to discuss. So I think 10% we will see a new Pokemon game from Bandai announced by the end of this financial year. Fire Emblem, I think, has a 10% chance to be dated for between April and June 2026. 10% as well, there's a Mario sports game in June 2026 specifically. And 10% chance a Pikmin spin-off is announced in the next General Direct. And if you want to find out what that Pikmin spin-off could be, do check out this video where I deep dive the concept a little while back. Thanks to everyone who watched, liked and subscribed. Do check out the Patreon on the link below, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.